Just picture this. Somewhere in a country's accounts sits a fund. Not one person's money, a whole nation's. Money set aside to build a future, power stations and jobs, and cities, and the lives of children not yet born. It is meant to be the safest money in the world because it belongs to everyone, and everyone is watching it. Money like that is not supposed to just sit there. It is supposed to grow, to build. Now take a leap. 2012, Las Vegas. A private party on a 5-acre lot right on the Strip. 300 guests. An indoor Ferris wheel turning slowly under the lights. A bar carved from a single block of ice, 24 feet long. A global pop star, it is said, rises up out of a giant cake. In the crowd, some of the most famous faces in Hollywood. And at the very center of it all, a soft-faced, smiling young man in glasses, turning 30 years old. His name is Jho Low, and the money that paid for that party, every glass of champagne, every celebrity, every spark of it, came, prosecutors would one day allege, from a fund exactly like the one you just pictured, a nation's savings, the public's money, on the other side of the world. This is the story of the man prosecutors accuse of building one of the largest financial thefts in human history, around $4.5 billion out of a country's own future. The man they say bankrolled a Hollywood movie about a con man with stolen money. Who gifted a supermodel a fortune in diamonds? Who bought a 300-foot super yacht and museum-grade art and mansions on 3 continents? And who today is a fugitive that no government on earth has managed to put in a courtroom? This is World's Richest. And here we tell not just how fortunes are built, but how they vanish. If this is your first time on the channel, subscribe. It is completely free. And today, the whole story of the biggest heist you were never quite told. But first, the obvious question. How does $4.5 billion simply disappear out of a country's own fund over 6 years, with a global bank arranging the paperwork and almost nobody stopping it? To understand that, you have to understand the man at the center. And the strangest thing about him is where he started. Because Jho Low was not born to great wealth. He was born in Penang, in Malaysia, in 1981, into a comfortable family. His father had made good money in business, but nothing like a fortune. And here is the first thing to understand about him. He did not build a company. He did not invent a product. What Jho Low built from very early on was the appearance of money, the myth of it. He was sent to Harrow, one of England's grandest boarding schools, and there, among the sons of Middle Eastern and Bruneian royalty, he learned the most valuable lesson of his life. That if you look rich enough and connected enough, powerful people will simply assume you belong. He would reportedly rent yachts and villas and pass them off as the family's. He learned to host, to introduce, to stand, always, in the middle of the photograph. He did not have a great fortune. He had something, in the end, far more useful. The appearance of one. At Harrow, and later at Wharton, one of the finest business schools in America, he built the network that would become his entire fortune. He threw parties. He picked up bills that were not his to pick up. He introduced the son of one powerful family to the daughter of another and let each of them assume he was as rich and as important as the company he kept. And one friendship above all would change everything. A young man named Reza Aziz. Because Reza's stepfather was a rising Malaysian politician named Najib Razak, a man who, one day soon, would become the Prime Minister of Malaysia. Hold on to that name. After university, Jho Low set up a small firm of his own and cast himself as a kind of go-between, a fixer, moving money and introductions between the oil-rich Gulf and the fast-growing economies of Southeast Asia. He had no great capital of his own, but he had access. He knew a prince here, a sultan there, a minister on the other end of a telephone, and around all of it, he had built a genius kind of trust. Everyone assumed that someone else, somewhere, had already checked who he really was. No one ever had. And then he began to whisper a very big idea, one he had studied closely, that Malaysia should build itself a sovereign wealth fund, a giant national investment pot, exactly like the ones the Gulf states had used to turn their oil into empires. It was, on its face, a genuinely good idea. He first helped shape a smaller version of it, in one Malaysian state, advising it, witnesses say, informally, without ever once holding a formal post. And in 2009, when his friend's stepfather, Najib Razak, became prime minister, that little fund was rolled up into something national. Something enormous. It was given a name few people outside Malaysia could ever remember. One Malaysia Development Berhad. Most of the world would just come to call it the fund. A fund owned by the state, which is to say, owned by the ordinary people of Malaysia. And Najib Razak himself sat at the head of its board. Now, stop here, because this is the single strangest fact in the entire story, and everything else hangs from it. The man that prosecutors would one day call the mastermind of it all held no job at the fund. None. He had no title there, no office, no signature on the founding papers. Officially, on paper, at the biggest state fund in the country, Jho Low was nobody at all. At most, an informal advisor, a friend of the family, a face in the background. And that, prosecutors say, was not an accident. It was the whole design. Because a man with no official position is a man with no official responsibility. According to the United States Department of Justice, more than $4.5 billion was misappropriated from that fund between 2009 and 2015. American prosecutors would call it the largest kleptocracy case they had ever pursued, the largest theft from a nation, by its own insiders, they had ever gone after. And keep one number straight, because it matters later. $4.5 billion is what was stolen. That is a different and separate number from the fund's total debts, which climbed far higher still. So how do you take $4.5 billion out of a fund without anyone noticing the hole? Here is the part that matters most, the trick itself. And it came, prosecutors say, in 3 great waves. The first, in 2009, was a partnership. The whole thing, prosecutors say, was set in motion at a meeting on a yacht moored off Monaco that summer. Soon after, the new fund announced a huge joint venture with a foreign oil company from Saudi Arabia worth around $2.5 billion. It looked like exactly the kind of serious, nation-building investment the fund had been created for. Prosecutors say it was, in their own word, a pretense. Because roughly $1 billion of the fund's money was quietly routed, not into oil, not into Malaysia, but into a Swiss bank account held by a shell company that prosecutors say Jho Low secretly controlled, a company that did real business with no one. The second and third waves were bigger, and they wore a suit and tie. Because to raise more money, the fund turned to one of the most powerful banks on Wall Street, Goldman Sachs. Goldman arranged around $6.5 billion in bonds for the fund across a series of deals and collected, for its trouble, around $600 million in fees. Many times the going rate. And prosecutors say that as that money flowed, more than $2.5 billion of it was skimmed away. Over $1 billion of it paid out in bribes to officials in Malaysia and the Gulf, and vast sums routed, once again, through shell companies. And this is the detail that tells you how cold and how clever the whole thing was. The shell companies were given names that deliberately mimicked real, respectable ones. There was a genuine blue-chip investment company in Abu Dhabi with a certain name, and prosecutors say the conspirators set up a fake company in a tax haven with an almost identical name, so that when more than $1 billion flowed into it, on paper, it looked for all the world like it was going to the real, trusted institution. It was not. It was a decoy wearing a respectable company's clothes. 1 billion, then 1.5, then more than $1 billion again, out of a nation's savings and into the dark. And here, the story stops being about paperwork and becomes about a party. Because all that money had to go somewhere, and where it went, prosecutors allege, is the most surreal part of the whole affair. Some of it, they say, financed a Hollywood movie through a production company co-founded by Najib's own stepson, Riza Aziz. The film was called The Wolf of Wall Street. A film of all things about a charming financial fraudster who steals a fortune and lives like a king. You could not invent the irony. Money that prosecutors call stolen, paying to make a glossy 3-hour movie about the glamour of stealing money. The film was a hit. It was nominated for Oscars, and almost no one who watched it knew they might be looking at the crime scene. The US government later said the movie was financed with more than $100 million embezzled from the fund, a slice of the $4.5 billion, not the whole of it. The production company settled with American authorities for $60 million, without admitting any wrongdoing. Then there was the yacht, a 300-foot super yacht named the Equanimity, with marble floors and gold leaf interiors, reportedly worth around $250 million. Years later, it would be chased down and seized off the coast of Bali, handed over to the Malaysian government, and sold for about $126 million, roughly half of what it had cost. And even that was, at the time, the single largest sum the country had managed to claw back. There was art, a museum's worth of it. Van Gogh, Picasso, Basquiat, Monet, Warhol. Some of those very paintings would one day be auctioned off, under the hammer, by United States Marshals, the proceeds sent back toward the victims. The victims being, of course, an entire country. There were mansions, a penthouse high over Manhattan, a mansion in Beverly Hills, property in London, and a stake, of all things, in a giant music publishing company, its songs playing in millions of homes that had no idea whose money had bought in. And then there were the gifts. Here you have to be careful and fair. A world-famous supermodel was given around $8 million in jewelry, and when she learned where the money may have come from, she handed back every single piece of it. She cooperated fully with investigators, and she was never accused of any wrongdoing at all. A world-famous actor was reportedly given expensive art and even an Oscar statuette, once won by another legend. And he, too, returned all of it. He sat for an interview with the FBI, and he was never accused of anything either. That is the honest shape of it. The people at the party were not the crime. They were the audience, the beautiful, distracting front row for a show that was being paid for, prosecutors say, with a nation's stolen money. So how does a thing this big, this loud, stay hidden for years? Here is the honest answer, and it is an uncomfortable one. It stayed hidden because many of the people who could have stopped it were the very people it was enriching, and because the fund's accounts had been built, deliberately, into a maze, too tangled, across too many countries and too many shell companies for any one regulator to follow. For a long time, it worked. And then, as these things so often do, it began to come apart, because of a few people who simply would not look away. It started with a lone journalist, a British reporter who ran a small investigative blog and who began, from early 2015, to publish the money trail, despite the threats and the lawsuits and the pressure to stop. Her big break came from a whistleblower, a former employee of that Saudi oil company, who walked out with a hard drive holding tens of thousands of internal emails. Though even that is not a clean, simple, heroic tale, because he was later arrested in Thailand and accused of trying to use those very documents to extort the company he had exposed. And then the story went truly global, when one of the biggest newspapers in America reported the single most explosive fact of all, that around $680 million from the tangle of accounts around the fund had landed, directly, in the personal bank accounts of the Prime Minister of Malaysia himself. Nearly $700 million. In his own accounts, weeks before a national election, the Prime Minister denied wrongdoing, and his side would later describe the money as a donation from the Saudi royal family. A court, eventually, would see it very differently. And two of the reporters who chased that trail would go on to write a book about the whole affair, a global bestseller, built around the man prosecutors accuse of masterminding it all, its title borrowed from the casino world's name for a gambler who bets impossibly large. The billion-dollar whale. And here is the part where the story turns, and where it becomes truly unusual. Because for a long time, nothing happened to anyone. The Prime Minister was still the Prime Minister. The investigations at home were quietly smothered. And it was only when Najib Razak lost an election, in 2018, when Malaysian voters threw his party out of power after more than 60 years, that the case truly cracked open. By then, Jho Low had already slipped away, out of Malaysia, out of reach, moving quietly between the few places on earth where a wanted man, with enough money, can still simply disappear. And what followed over the next several years is the strangest reckoning in modern financial history, because one by one, everyone around him faced justice. Najib Razak, the former prime minister, was convicted in 2020 of corruption and money laundering tied to the fund, and went to prison. His original sentence of 12 years was later reduced to 6, reduced, not pardoned. And at the end of 2025, in a second, even larger trial, he was convicted again, though that verdict is now under appeal and is not yet final. Goldman Sachs, the bank that arranged the bonds, agreed to pay Malaysia around $3.9 billion, and, in a separate global settlement, around $2.9 billion more, to regulators. Its Malaysian unit pleaded guilty to a criminal charge. 2 of its bankers were pursued. One pleaded guilty and became the government's star witness, and was, in the end, sentenced to just 2 years. The other was convicted at trial by a jury and sentenced to 10. Najib's own stepson, the film producer, had money laundering charges against him dropped, in exchange for handing back more than $100 million in assets. And across the globe, hunting the money through courts and banks and auction houses, American and Malaysian authorities slowly clawed back more than $1 billion of it. The yacht, the paintings, the properties, sold off, piece by piece, to try to make a nation whole. Now, stop, and hold all of that together for a second. A prime minister, in prison, a global bank, billions of dollars in penalties, 2 of its bankers, one who confessed, one convicted by a jury, a stepson forced to hand back a fortune, and the man that prosecutors say sat at the very center of it, the man they say designed the entire machine, free, never tried, never convicted of anything, at a trial, anywhere on earth, and, to this day, denying every last piece of it. And now, the part that is easy to lose, under all the yachts and the diamonds and the movie stars. Whose money was it, really? Because a fund like that does not hold some rich man's fortune. It holds a country's, and when it was hollowed out, the bill did not vanish. It landed on the people of Malaysia. The fund had taken on enormous debts, far more than the $4.5 billion that was stolen, and ordinary Malaysians, most of whom never saw a single glass of that champagne, have been paying those debts down ever since. Some of the money is not due to be fully cleared until the year 2039. Think about that. A child born in Malaysia today will be a grown adult, with children of their own, before their country has finished paying for a party in Las Vegas that they were never invited to. That is the particular cruelty of stealing from a fund like this. There is not one victim you can photograph. There is a whole nation, quietly poorer for a generation. And what about the biggest, most dangerous question of all? Did the Prime Minister know? Here, we will not tell you what to think. We will only tell you what has been established and what has not. What is established, a court found Najib Razak guilty of taking money linked to the fund and sent him to prison. What is contested, how much he knew about the wider scheme, how much was hidden even from him, and how the story of that donation holds up, some of which is still being fought over on appeal in Malaysian courts right now. Those are the facts and the open questions. The opinions we will leave to you. So where is Jho Low today? The honest answer is, no one who will say for certain actually knows. He is wanted in both the United States and Malaysia. An international arrest notice was issued for him back in 2018, though by recent years, even the public status of that notice had grown strangely murky, prompting questions in Malaysia's own parliament. He is widely believed to be sheltering somewhere in Macau or mainland China, but that has never been officially confirmed, and Beijing has denied he is there. Through spokesmen and through his own website, he has never stopped insisting that he is innocent. That he was a convenient scapegoat, a single name for the whole world to blame. And then, in 2026, came the strangest twist of all. Reports emerged that Jho Low had applied for a pardon from the President of the United States. Now, be careful here, because the facts are narrow. It was an application, a report, not a pardon granted. A White House official said the names under discussion were not on the radar, and a U.S. pardon, even if it ever came, could not erase the charges waiting for him in Malaysia and Singapore, where he has still never stood trial and never answered for any of it in a court of law. And there is one last thing worth saying plainly. Some of the stories we tell on this channel are of businesses that failed, of honest bets that simply did not pay off, of good companies caught by a changing world. This is not one of those. Prosecutors say there was never a real business here at all, only the appearance of one, wrapped tightly around a nation's savings, like bright paper around an empty box. So, how does this story end? The truth is, it doesn't. Not yet. And maybe that is the whole point. Because we like our stories of crime to end with a man in handcuffs walking into a courtroom facing the people he wronged. This one refuses to. A prime minister fell, a great bank paid billions, bankers went to prison, an empire of yachts and art and mansions was seized and auctioned off piece by piece to try to pay a nation back. And the one man that prosecutors say built all of it is still out there, somewhere, free, watching. And here is the thing to carry with you. The next time you hear a government promise to invest the people's money in the nation's future, the safest, most watched money there is, remember how quietly and how completely a fund exactly like that was emptied while the whole world was staring at the party. Because the money never speaks for itself. The people standing in front of it do. And sometimes they are lying. Maybe one day a plane will land and Jho Low will finally walk into a court. Or maybe he will simply grow old, somewhere no one can reach him, and the full truth will never come home. Which ending will it be? This story does not yet know. If tonight's story made you stop and think, then subscribe and send it to someone who wants the real story behind the great fortunes, not just the shine on top, but the ground it was standing on. We will see you with another one very soon.